Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Legend of Kelamentura. Hey, it's been a wee while. It's actually been over a year, probably a year and a half at this point, to be honest, since the last time I graced any of you with my dulcet tones. So there's a few housekeeping items to start. Campaign, the Legend of Kelamentura, still going strong. In fact, recently we had our 51st session earlier last year. God, yeah, I wrote this before Christmas. I wrote this before the New Year. That's when I wrote this. um, Earlier 2023, last year, the group actually started meeting up for in-person sessions, and we did that on our 40th session, which is also our 2-year anniversary. Things have been very busy for the Scallywag since the last updates, and there's a lot has come to light since then, but we'll get back to that. In this sort of podcast video thing, recap, omnibus type thing, I'm going to recap all the events of the past 51 sessions, which covers almost 3 months in game time and over 2.5 years in real life. Before we get into that, there's maybe some people who are new to this world, or it's been a while since you've heard my voice or listened to one of these. So let's do some introductions and world setting, shall we? First up, out of the gate, there will be some water noises, so I apologise for that. I think it's picked up by the mic, but sure, what the hell. My name is David. I'm the Dungeon Master and creative mind behind the homebrew campaign Legend of Kelamentura. The world is run using 5th edition rules. I've just decided to be awkward and reposition my windows. So we use 5th edition rules to run the game, although the rule of cool comes into play quite a bit during my games with skill checks to make sure things are still somewhat grounded and balanced. The setting is what I would call high fantasy, as most D&D games tend to be, and there's a range of historical periods across the world. The main continent for this campaign is Mentura, which I would describe as sort of late medieval with firearms technology being implemented here and there, with a heavy reliance on magic. Kind of think, if you will, Assassin's Creed 2 sort of technology. That's kind of the best way I can really describe that. In my world, in Kelamentura, magic is inherently divine in nature, in that the energy or weave that is implemented came about as a result of the Pantheon visiting the world and their aura sticking to the planet. Worship of the gods maintains the energy, so in areas where worship is limited, things tend to get a bit weird. The other continents are Pangaea, ruled by the Salazan dynasty, and Huscador, ruled by the Republic of Amberino. The Republic is a kind of a loose copy of the early United States, with 13 populated territories and a democratically elected government. They also use magic, like the people of Mentura, but they integrate it with technology in a sort of Renaissance, early modern period, or almost Victorians-ish. The dynasty itself is a collection of city-states that occupy the continent, which is kind of Greek-ish, kind of Greco-Roman type things. And the city-states have their own political figurehead, but they all answer to the Empress Salazan, the progenitor of the dynasty. The dynasty is the least magical of all the continents, with a lot of the population being either atheist or agnostic. As such, they are very technologically advanced, but what I would class as early modern, with electricity, sporadic internal combustion, and a prolific use of firearms. Hopefully that does cover everything that we need to know before I dive in properly. But again, if you have any questions or things, if I don't cover it at some point later in the video, or the podcast, whatever this ends up being, stick it in the comments and I'll try to get back to it. So yeah, that's the recap. And let's go back to where it all began. Cast your minds back to April 2021. That's when I started running this game. But as far as Kelamentura goes, our story begins in the year 527 post-Purge, or PP. A long-lasting religious civil war of sorts, fought between the followers of the Uthar, Pure Ones, and Vanrar, Scourge, deities. That is the Purge. Our story begins 527 PP, the day after the summer solstice. Our party convenes at the Adventurers Guild in the military capital of Terran, most of whom are members of the said Adventurers Guild who've lapsed with their membership, while others have their own reasons for being there. At this moment in time, there are 5 party members. We have Soraya, our high elf cleric of Corellon. Bjorn, who is our half-orc wizard paladin at this moment in time. We have Mr. Neb, a changeling bard. Lorilla, our Firbolg druid. And Gimdrin, or Gimme, our Asimar monk. Right, so that's where the campaign starts. It is pretty much, there's a whole monologue, introduction to the campaign, get to the guild, give it a bunch of contracts, or the choice of contracts, some very early plot hooks. Party pick up a contract to head north to a mining settlement or mining town called Steelborough, where the mine has had some issues with some sort of strange draconic creature that's been found underground. And the party go, okay, well, we'll go ahead and take that out. They also took another contract out for a farming community north of the capital in a town, in a sort of a farming colony town type thing called Golden Fields, where there's been a whole bunch of goblin problems. So they've done that. So they're heading north to Golden Fields and Steelborough. Steelborough is on the way to the capital, and Golden Fields is a bit beyond it. So that with the contracts gathered, contracts picked, they do a bit of a shopping, get a few bits and pieces, supplies, and get a cart, travel out of Terran, and begin the journey north. And for the first night of camping, Lorilla, because we're all kind of playing around, getting into the characters, Lorilla, wild-shaped into a wolf, went off and did some hunting for the party. Hunted a boar, brought it back, nice big feast. As they travel north out of Terran, which is kind of in the southern half of the continent, along the coast, southeastern coast of the continent, traveled following the roads to the capital, they came across a bandit ambush. I can't remember exactly how the ambush was set up. I think there was a cart that was kind of at the side of the road with a girl sitting on it. And as the party approached, saw the girl, bandits came out and ha-ha! Surprise! And that was the first combat. The first party combat we got into. Quite a fraught combat, but it ended within a round or two with Bjorn, our half-orc paladin, charging forth on his magical steed and pretty much one-shotting the leader, the guy who was in charge, of the mage. Which, the bandits, thinking they were going to come across a soft target, immediately threw their other weapons, went, nope, we're done. They'd been paid by the mage to rob people, and they'd kidnapped the girl who was on the cart. Under interrogation, revealed the location of the camp, and Bjorn took off to go investigate. The rest of the party stayed behind, spoke to the girl. What's the girl's name? Amelia? Amy? Something Bruce. Somebody, Bruson. Amelia Bruson. Oh God, I've actually forgotten the name of the bloody NPC. You'd think I wrote that down in my recap, wouldn't you? So yeah, they kind of had a bit of a conversation, spoke with her. The party then carried on, so well, Bjorn will catch up with us. Yeah, and then they set off, and Soraya got a nice bit of role, but was kind of a bit distracted by the violence that had just happened. She was Soraya kind of spent the last number of years in a monastery type thing. She wasn't a monk, but kind of definitely more of a religious individual. Bit of a sheltered upbringing, well, as far as she knew, a bit of a sheltered upbringing, and wasn't quite used to such acts of violence. So she's a bit distracted and actually drove the cart off the road and shattered a wheel. Managed to get it fixed, but it took a couple hours. And while the party was fixing that, Bjorn went off, found the camp, and found new tents, campfires, and in the mage's tent found a chest that contained some loot and letters, content of which alluded apparently to some shady dealings in Brewstock, which is the next town. That night, as the party made camp that night, and the next day picked up again, past a roadside shrine to their deity, the Pure Ones, Pantheon, not deities, the Pantheon. A few of them, Bjorn, Gimme, and Soraya both left some tributes. Got some temp HP for that. And that evening, they made camp But where they made camp was actually a place that had been lurking quite literally beneath the surface were a number of black puddings. Now, I'll say this before I go any further. This campaign started with everyone at level 10. Because I intended this campaign to be a few sessions. And it kind of spiraled from there, as you'll soon see. So I didn't throw a bunch of level 1 PCs and like into a fight with 4 black puddings. These guys are level 10. A pretty fraught battle ensued. They fought and killed 2 of the puddings, and the final 2 fled. But the last one, as it fled away, it KO'd our monk Gimme, almost killed her before it fecked off. But they revived her, found another spot for the night, and rested up. The next day, mouse is playing up. The next day, the party woke up, a bit sore from the fight. Excuse me. And made their way approached the town of Brewstock. They came across this fairly innocuous looking road marker. There's a little line of cobblestone across the road, which was the edge of the Brewstock influence, i.e. the town limits. Made their way up to the town, they harassed some guards, as the party tends to do, and made their way to the Mayhew residence, where they met Bron and Sarah Mayhew, parents of Amelia Mayhew, who was the kidnapped girl. The party were thanked for returning the daughter. They were given a bunch of money and some alcohol as payment, and promised a future favour if they were ever in a position to help, because the Mayhew family are kind of upper middle class brewers. Bit of a brewing family. They're the wines and stouts and ale, that sort of thing. That's where their money comes from. But they obviously had ambitions to better their station, better their position. This is what was alluded to in the letters that Bjorn came across. But I think after some insight checks, the party kind of determined that the Mayhews, they're actually they're ambitious, but they're, decent folk. They're just caught up in some nasty stuff, but seemingly this mage business was the end of it. Party then went back to the town centre, found the tavern called the Drunken Banshee, and where they met the father and son team, Sean and Adam Bruson, who own and ran the tavern. While there, a few of the party members partook in a drinking challenge run by a dwarf called Hunter, who was another brewer. During the challenge, Lorilla kind of decided to sit down, take a look around the tavern, scan for the patrons, and noticed off to one side there was a soup kitchen on the side of the tavern that was run by the son. At this point, Lorilla, who also had was the alert feat or the observant feat, whichever one allows you to read lips, used that to kind of look around the patrons of the town, the citizens of the town, the patrons of the bar. Because they got a bit of a vibe. The town was a bit on edge. When they'd approached, there were some guards a little bit on edge, and they could see there was an air of tension. Lorilla was able to determine the town had recently come under a bit of a gnoll attacks. But a bunch of small skirmishes here and there kind of made them feel like it was a probing attack, but didn't know what the hell was going to go on. But the party ate and drank the night away. And in the wee hours of the morning, after only a few hours of sleep, the party were woken by alarm bells, and the son and Adam, one of the owners, came up to the party's room and says the town was under attack by gnolls. Will you help us? Of course, they roused themselves, came to the town's aid, got involved in a pretty hectic battle near the town gates. Managed to prevent a flanking maneuver, so the defense of the gates weren't overrun, and basically, their actions helped prevent the town being overrun. And eventually, after getting a long rest, they met the marshal of the town, who thanked them for the work and asked if they would be willing to investigate a nearby base camp of the gnolls that some rangers had identified. At this point, Mr. Neb, who had kind of kind of went off on one for the Marshal for, okay, why is this town so badly defended? What the fuck have you been up to? Called her out on some things, and he then headed off by himself. Oh, excuse me. At that moment in time, this was kind of the end of Mr. Neb's involvement with the party. The player had other commitments, he was moving, so he disappeared for a while. At this point, and then whenever he headed off, Bjorn, at this moment in time, him and Mr. Neb and Bjorn were kind of gone on pretty well. When they had been at the bandit camp, Bjorn had found a sending stone in that chest and given it to Mr. Neb. And while Neb had gone off by himself, the sending stone buzzed. He went, "Oh, a single sending stone doesn't know where the other one is." And he went, "Okay." He answered and failed to deceive the creature, which kind of basically asked for an update. There was an arcane flash and a vision of a large creature of eyes and teeth before the vision faded. And Mr. Neb got a sense that this creature was going to be paying attention to him. And then, after that outburst, that was kind of the end of one session, Mr. Neb then left. And we get our first new faces. We get Titus, our wandering Tortle fighter, a bit of a pugilist. And our rogue one, Achilles 10-step, the Scourge Hunter. These new figures were, again, told by the Marshal, "Hey, you guys are new to the town, you want to help? We've got some guys heading to look up a base camp. Maybe go find them and make yourselves useful." Went off, bought some supplies, met the ranger escorts, who led them to where the cave was. Ventured into the came into the cave, found that the traps had been triggered. Went inside, had a mooch around, and found a steep tunnel that delved way on down. And when they got to the bottom, they found that there was a number of, excuse me. In the cave, there was a bonfire, which they found some partially burned documents and a code book. There was a cage in which there was a beaten and bloodied figure who was still alive. There was an altar that had, it was a scourge altar, and of course when Achilles saw that, he went ahead and defiled it. There was a teleportation circle that was inert in the corner of the room, and they found a bag of holding. I can't remember exactly what was in the bag of holding, but they did the old trick of, okay, reach in, grab the bottom, and turn it inside out. And a whole bunch of gems and gold and stuff came tumbling out. And among the items in the bag of holding was a hammer that kind of gave off a very divine aura, which Bjorn took a bit of a notion to. But he picked that up. So they got the loot, their documents, documents in the code book, and the captive, headed back to town. And when they got back to town, and with the marshal's help and the rangers' interrogations, they found this figure in the cage had been complicit with the Gnoll attacks. They'd been provided intel and changing patrols to allow the attacks to happen. So that individual was hauled off to the stocks. And then they sat down with the marshal, went through the coded letters and the code book. And upon examining the letters, they found evidence of plotting and Gnoll tribes' involvement. And there was reference to the contact, which links the Gnoll tribes, or whatever they wish, to a cult known as the Defiant, which Achilles, who had previously been a retired adventurer, he'd come out of retirement when whispers had reached his ears of this cult coming back, and this is confirmation to him that these weren't just whispers; these were, in fact, a very real thing. So the party got some intelligence, got new hammers, got some loot, and we're going to carry on north. At this moment in time, then they were, in exchange for their help, the marshal, says you can have your pick of the loot, and introduced them to a couple of NPCs who said, "Oh, these guys are heading on north. They're heading to Steelborough. They can give you a lift." They were introduced to a Loxodon merchant from Tequila Bay within the Salazan dynasty called Thrum. And his entourage, there's Flish, who is his orc bodyguard, Blood, who's a Minotaur bodyguard, Nadia, who is another sort of security member, the silent bodyguard of Thrum. And there is Professor Theseus, who is a very eccentric tinkerer and inventor from the Republic of Amberino. And also, while the party were gathering up to leave, we had another new face. We had Brock Ali, the Warforged Bard. Kind of goes by the name Bobs, built of beech and steel. They only join us for a few sessions, but worth mentioning them. So he joined the party, and they jumped onto the cart and began their journey north. And while journeying north, the party managed to decode the letters they'd found, and they learned a bit more of that as well. They learned that the Brewstock attack had been plotted to steal items, because in Brewstock there was a significant merchant camp, so these attacks didn't seem to be, an attempt to take over the town or destroy it. It seemed to be more about a distraction that a group could break in and steal items. There was again reference to the Mehi family, but it kind of confirmed what they'd already known, that there was a blackmail attempt and some sort of kidnap to gain leverage over the Mehi family, who again I'd said these guys are politically ambitious, and this kidnap attempt was let's get them on our side. And most concerning of all, there was references to the Defiance being used to undermine and overthrow the Council of Mentura, who are the governing body, which, that's pretty interesting. Then a few days' travel, which is much, again, Thrum, he travels with this massive lumbering wagon that is not pulled by cart horse, but is powered by some sort of arcane engine, which another party had never seen before. But it travels much faster than on horses. What is a 2-day travel for Thrum would have been easily 4 or 5 days on horseback. But during this travel, Lorilla opened up about some visions that she had received from her god Toromir that had caused her to abandon her hermit lifestyle within a sacred grove. The parties kind of talked back and forth and kind of bonded and shared backstories. Achilles opened up about his past, talked about the defiant hunting, the death of a childhood friend, which led to his retirement, and what he had been doing since, which was, working as a sort of a priest and fighter in a temple in his hometown. And Titus, who was, as I mentioned previously, a bit of a pugilist, always up for a fight, challenged a couple of the bodyguards to a fight. Everything went pretty well, bit of crack, bit of banter. And on the last day of travel, after this sort of party bonding stuff that was going on, they emerged from the heavily wooded roads, and in front of them was this large mountain range, just kind of cut the entire horizon. And in the midst of the mountain range, kind of slap bang in the middle of this mountain range, they saw this cascading rainbows of light, as like sunlight was shining off some sort of crystals or crystals and glass and all sorts of precious metal. It was like this rainbow effect that kind of gave this illusion of this large city in the mountains, which the party kind of knew at this point. Oh, that's the first time a lot of them had seen the capital, Mentura. But they kind of headed off towards there and then turned right to go to Steelborough, because Steelborough is on the mountain range, but it's on the eastern side. So party veered off. And towards the end of the day, a few more bits of travel, they arrived at Steelborough, which is a pretty heavily defended area. So they arrived at Steelborough. Thrum bid them goodbye. He went off to do his own business. And the party scooted off and checked in, because Steelborough, very, very heavily defended. It's a pretty serious mining town. There's a lot of very precious stuff comes out of that town. And Steelborough wants to keep it locked down. So we're checked in and told, right, go speak to... There's an individual here in Steelborough by the name of Christopher. He's a kind of representative from the Adventurers Guild. Thank the party for arriving. Oh, you're here? Great, yeah, no worries. I've told you're coming. And advise them that the situation has developed somewhat and it's gotten a wee bit worse from you guys. We're told about it. There's no further activity from whatever this creature was, but other mining operations have been attacked by Duergar. Told them this combination of attacks has driven the miners to go on strike, which is very bad because the precious metals and minerals reserves that have been built up are dwindling. And they've been given a number of NPCs to go speak to. There was Foreman Bjorn, who was the miner, the foreman of the mines on the day of the attack. There's a number of survivors in an infirmary. And there is the man who owns the mines. In fact, he's kind of in charge of Steelborough. A dwarf by the name of Orsic Steelbrow. So a bunch of points. Point of contact. After receiving this information, they headed off through the courtyard. Because at this point, as far as they're concerned, Steelborough is just this massive... Steelborough is just a courtyard with a bunch of warehouses and stuff around. They're kind of like, oh, this isn't very impressive. Where's the houses? Where's the taverns? Where's the city? And they're like, oh yeah, go into that cave back there. There's a lift and it'll drop you down. So they go to this lift, this massive wood lift, which then, once they're all on board, levers drop down, and it descends 200 or 300 feet down into the earth. And as it drops down to this long stone chute, they slowly reveals a massive underground cavern, stalactites, stalagmites, all that good stuff. Which is a glittering cave, which is Steelborough, which is much more impressive than the courtyard above. Once the lift arrived at the bottom, they spoke to the guard, the ones manning the lift, got some directions, went off, spoke to Bjorn and the survivors, who were able to tell them more about what happened that day and get a bit more of a description. Which kind of led them to like teeth and claws and illusions of a breath weapon, which is, oh, this definitely sounds draconic in nature. But the description there was talk about fur and fangs and claws, which sounds draconic, but fur and dragons don't really make sense. But armed with this information, they went forth, found Orsic, spoke to him, who, after conflating all this information and stories, Orsic says, yeah, what you're describing sounds like an ancient creature called a Draco Bear, which there hasn't been a Draco Bear sighting in over half a millennium. And the Draco Bears is, as you would imagine, they're a hybrid creature of a dragon and a massive bear. This stitched together monstrosity. Which they kind of, through their own research and inquiries, they find out these things are, at the time they were pretty vicious, but if this thing's been buried underground for half a millennium, I mean, we'll see. But armed with this information, they gathered some healing potions, some other bits and pieces, and headed down into the mines with a couple of guards who knew the way. They were told on the journey that they could only go so far down the main mining paths as to kind of cut off the Duergar from getting to the city and to try and stop the beast as well. They had collapsed a number of main tunnels, so they had to go through service tunnels, which are a bit smaller and a bit more difficult to navigate. But when they entered the tunnels, they managed to hearing some noise up ahead, they found there were a couple of goblins in a supply room. The party actually spoke with the goblins, didn't just outright attack them. And through some good persuasion checks, convinced the goblins to act as guides. And the goblin says, oh yeah, we can take you there, but are we helping you? Because that thing was terrifying, but we know where it is. So with the goblins' help, the party were able to bypass the maze of tunnels, which I had set up for them. And they arrived this wide open stone chamber with this massive dwarven security door, which instead of a lock and key was protected by riddles. Ah yes, the infamous riddle door, which when my party hears this, that'll get them to give them some PTSD. But they solved the riddles and made their way into the cave, and found that there'd been, the fallen in the initial attack. Some of them are still around. Into the cave, and Urasil made their appearance, who is the Draco Bear. It was this ancient, massive creature that had been underground for so long and had been found by the Duragard, had been living down there, and finally brought closer to the surface for their own machinations. This massive, this fierce battle ensued with, unfortunately, the guards of Steelborough were incinerated by the fire breath of Urasil. And a massive slugging match ensued where heavy damage was sustained by all members of the party, including Bjorn, who, all the fury and rage and righteous indignation that a paladin could bring to mind, started absolutely going to town on Urasil, drew his fury and ire, and at one point it looked like Urasil had ripped the throat from Bjorn, because that's quite almost what he did. But thanks to his orcish nature, his orcish resilience, popped back up to 1 hit point instead of dying. He then went next, and Bjorn, after coming back from the brink of death, 1 hit point, raised his hammer and absolutely battered the fuck out of Urasil. Just full on anime hammer, boom, dead. And the party were kind of like, okay, we've survived that. That was lucky. That was pretty intense. After which moment in time, they took a short rest. Titus did some scavenging, made some fang necklaces for the party. And Achilles and the party managed to scoot about the tunnels. And during the battle, it wasn't just Urasil, the Draco Bear. There had actually been some Aids, some people with guns that are up in some nooks and crannies of the cave. So that kind of, there's definitely some stuff's going on here. But got some weapons, got some info, got some loot. And when the party then went ahead to try to investigate, because Urasil came from a large tunnel towards the back of the chamber, went to look at that, and in the process set off a chain reaction of explosions that was designed to collapse the tunnel, and the party barely made it out alive from the collapsing tunnel. Honestly, they just about got this. They legitimately just survived it. Some very close rolls. But after slaying the beast, the party made their way back out of the mines, went back up to Orsic, told them they had been successful. Orsic says, thank you very much. And gave them some coin, as they'd been promised, but also gave them some information. And to Gimdrin, the monk, said that your husband has been seen in another town to the west. And Achilles, who was on a bit of a quest to find information about a sacred blade. The blade had last been seen in the frozen north. Kind of the DM dropping plot hooks, if you will. Orsic again thanked them for everything and says, if we have any more troubles with the tunnels, any more activities, there's any more evil activity or defiant incursions, we'll let you guys know. Spent the night in a tavern, the Iron Heart, which is a very upclass, upscale dwarven tavern paid for by Orsic. Thanks. That night, the party sat down and debriefed. And Titus, who was a bit of an artiste, it turns out, he sat down, pulled out some painting supplies, and created this massive, beautiful canvas of like the slaying of Udasil, and gave it to the barman. He went, "That's fucking cool," and hung it up on the wall, pride of place. At which point they had the night of celebrations. The next day, went back, spoke to Christopher from the Adventurers Guild. And he says, "Well, you've already been paid. You all's good. I'll mark that contract as completed, and I'll pass it on to the guild and let them know things are going well." And at this point, Broccoli bids farewell to the party and scoots on. And yeah, that wasn't again that player had to dip for personal reasons. And that, genuinely, at this point, that's where I intended it to end. It was going to be a short camping. This is my first time ever running a game, so that was where this was supposed to end. And to save my voice, I'm going to do in a couple of parts. That's the end of part 1. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and yeah, come back for part 2. Also, so you guys don't have to sit and listen to me ramble on for hours. But that's the end of part 1, and part 2 is going to be recorded soon and be uploaded soon. But yeah, thanks for listening, adventures, and I'll catch you in part 2.